and collectively, we do not misuse the rights that we have been given. They should be exercised in the public interest. We must ensure that we follow the letter and spirit of the Code of Conduct and related rules which we have approved to regulate our business. Each member is here to represent the views of his or her constituents and to participate in the process of democracy. We should ensure that every member is heard with the respect to which we are all entitled, regardless of the views that are being expressed. Every member of the public has the right to expect that his or her Member of Parliament will behave with civility, in the best traditions of fairness, and with the highest level of probity and with integrity. I turn now to security, not only for Members of Parliament, but also for our staff and for the staff of this House, who work so hard on our behalf to ensure that the House of Commons continues its tradition of welcoming the maximum number of visitors, both from home and abroad. I expect every member of this House to cooperate fully with those officials who are responsible for our security, which ensures that our democratic process is not disrupted. Order.
Flory's bill.
Order. I have to acquaint the House that this House has this day attended Her Majesty in the House of Peers, and that Her Majesty was pleased to make a most gracious speech from the throne to both Houses of Parliament, of which I have, for greater accuracy, obtained a copy. I shall direct that the terms of the speech be printed in the votes and proceedings. Copies are available in the office. Order. Before I call the mover and seconder, I want to announce the proposed pattern of debate during the remaining days of the Loyal Address. Thursday, 16th November, Health and Education. Monday, 20th November, Communities and Local Government, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Wednesday, 22nd November, Foreign Affairs and Defence. Thursday, 23rd November, Home Affairs and Transport. Monday, 27th November, Treasury, Work and Pensions. Order. I call Alun Michael.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to Your Majesty for the gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. I share this privilege with my honourable friend for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. Her constituency makes the title of Cardiff South and Penarth sound curt. So I expect her to refer to the fact that my father's family hails from Llanrhaeadr y Mochnant, that my mother was brought up in Tinnafelin near Llanfachraeth, and that I was born in Bringuran. Mr. Speaker, after years as a minister speaking to an empty chamber, it restores my confidence to have the enthusiastic attendance of so many colleagues and the rapt attention of both front benches. When I last spoke to an overflowing chamber, both sides said we were spending too much time on something which was not a priority for anyone. But they still poured in hour after hour, day after day, to debate the hunting bill. So, thank goodness hunting has lost its political potency after most hunts discovered they can have a good day's sport without needing to chase a wildlife. Speaking today is a particular pleasure at the start of a session in which we celebrate the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Cooperative Party, the fourth largest party in this chamber. It will be a forward-looking celebration because the cooperative ideal is a political principle whose time has come, and that's my theme today. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was very far-sighted when he embedded cooperative principles in Labour's new Clause 4. And it runs like a golden thread through today's Queen's speech. Global warming, international terrorism, globalisation, the pervasive presence of the internet and converged technology are all political drivers that make cooperation, internationally, nationally and locally, the only alternative to chaos. Today I'm particularly conscious of standing in the shoes of Cledwyn Hughes, one of my predecessors as Secretary of State for Wales, who moved the Loyal Address in 1978 for my predecessor, Jim Callaghan. As a new Member of Parliament in 1987, the first note I received from anybody was from Cledwyn. Croeso I bachgan arall o Ynys Môn, tirdi gael paned. Welcome to another boy for Anglesey, come and have a cup of tea. As a boy, Cledwyn used to travel to school by bus with my Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob used to say that both of them made it to the House of Commons. Cledwyn inside as Secretary of State for Wales, Uncle Bob outside as the policeman on St Stephen's entrance. Cledwyn was a lovely, wise man, steeped in his local community, a passionate Welshman, and above all, a fighter for education, for jobs and opportunity for his Ireland. He was deeply proud when my honourable friend, the present member for Ynys Môn, who shares those characteristics, won the seat in 2001. Cledwyn would have applauded the way this Queen's speech promises partnership with the Welsh Assembly and to devolve power to local communities, a radical development of the way we've devolved power to Scotland, Wales and London. Now, I mentioned Wales, under 3 million, and London, over 7 million, because devolution is not about nationalism or the breakup of the United Kingdom. It's about good governance, it's about delivery, it's about engagement. And working with my constituency's excellent Assembly member, Lorraine Barrett, doesn't diminish my work as an MP. Together, Prime Minister, we achieve more than we could ever achieve alone. At DTI, I worked very closely with Rhodri Morgan to win 6 more years of European funding for Wales, delivered when my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, achieved agreement on the EU budget last December. They said it couldn't be done. Our cooperation on Objective 1 has enabled Wales to outperform many parts of the United Kingdom in recent economic growth. On Saturday, in Welsh Labour's conference, we agreed a vision for the future. Radical, ambitious, confident, practical. What a contrast to the alternative. Yes. Conservatives who oppose devolution, jumping into bed with nationalists who dragged the Assembly down in pursuit of nationalism. It's a marriage of inconvenience. Nothing unites them except hatred of Labour's success in inspiring progress for the people.
Give it to him, Alun.
But the greatest privilege today is to be the 10th successive Labour MP to move this motion, to be the 10th successive warm-up act for my right honourable friend, the member for Setchfield. And by the way, my diary is currently free, so I can offer to do the same for the next Prime Minister in 2016. I hope this Queen's speech won't be talked down for the benches opposite. The public are more impressed when the opposition gives credit where credit's due. And a lot of credit is due. Since 1997, we've had a golden age of radical domestic legislation. The minimum wage delivered after 100 years of pandemic. Laws promoting social inclusion.
Opposed by you.
Education, enterprise, justice, child welfare, and much, much more. In my own constituency, under the Conservatives, a generation of young people were denied hope and opportunity. But since 1997, unemployment and long-term youth unemployment have both more than halved. Behind those statistics are individual young people standing tall, able to use their talents, able to be enterprising, able to have ambition. I remember my right honourable friend for Setchfield visiting Cardiff in the Labour leadership election in 1994. On the banks of Cardiff Bay, I explained how the Cardiff Bay barrage would transform the city. And he looked puzzled. And he said, how can anybody oppose this? Now Cardiff is exciting and confident as any city in Europe. It's good to celebrate that success today in Enterprise Week. I also welcome today's speech's clear focus on cutting crime and disorder in local communities. We should ignore the media nonsense about an ASBO being seen as a badge of pride. For me, it's a badge of pride to have invented the ASBO. They work, so parties opposite who oppose them nationally fall over themselves to claim credit locally.
That's right.
The ASBO is a simple concept which addresses the fact that laws often fail to prevent what they forbid. Our courts may be good at deciding who stabbed the butler in the billiard room, but they fail to deal with a moving picture of disorder and petty crime which destroys communities. So on the civil burden of proof, we can now show that nuisance exists. We give the offender an ASBO saying, just stop it. Breach it and the punishment will be swift and sure, but behave yourself and you'll hear no more. No conviction to reduce employment chances and less nuisance for the neighbours. All it needs is the application of common sense by everyone. It works, as long as everybody plays their part in following up ASBO breaches briskly, and I would urge my right honourable friend to put the Crown Prosecution Service in charge of the whole process so that the benefits are delivered consistently everywhere. The speech promises to protect victims, and I hope the courts are listening, because since 2003, the Attorney General has referred 341 lenient cases to the Court of Appeal. In 231 of those cases, the sentences was increased. That's a 68% success rate when it had to be shown that the sentence was not just unduly lenient, but unreasonably so. That's not a politician's criticism of the judiciary, that's appeal judges saying those sentences weren't acceptable. Mr. Speaker, in other cases, I want to see the courts make more use of the community sentences that this government has provided. In one project, I saw young women having drug treatment and having their babies with them, breaking the cycle of despair and drugs and prostitution. Common sense is...
I did read out a statement saying that honourable members, and in this case a right honourable member, should be heard. The honourable gentleman should be heard. And there is an awful lot of conversation, and it is unfair. Order. The right honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. In one project, I saw young women having drug treatment and having their babies with them, breaking the cycle of despair and drugs and prostitution. Common sense is needed to complement the cooperative approach that it is at the heart of crime reduction partnerships in order to deliver my right honourable friend's genuine and long-held determination to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. The new challenge is e-crime. The UK has led the way dramatically, cutting the child abuse sites hosted in this country through a cooperative approach involving business, police, children's charities and government. We now need a fresh approach to e-crime in general, and I urge my right honourable friend to use the expertise that there is here in this House amongst members of Parliament as a resource to tackle these issues. The other side of that coin is information. I hope my right honourable friend and the Chancellor will accelerate the work of DirectGov, now seen internationally as a model. People don't seek information in departmental silos, and we can go further, linking the Start Here model to create a single democratic access point to information from government, local services and the third sector, even for the digitally challenged. That sort of cooperation is absolutely essential to promote civil society. Now, I'm confident that the government is on the right lines, and I'm pushing at an open door. I welcome the Chancellor's commitment to exploring the potential of cooperation and the wider third sector ahead of the spending review. An excellent Treasury team is pursuing these issues, and the real challenge is to embed an understanding of the third sector in the warp and weave of the whole government machine. That's why I applaud the Prime Minister's decision to create the Office of the Third Sector. My honourable friend for Doncaster North has made great start. He's shown respect to the independence of the third sector, and the sector has responded. I chair the Third Sector Network, which has brought together umbrella organisations from across social enterprise, voluntary and community organisations, trust and the cooperative movement to work together to identify common values. This builds on the pioneering work that my right honourable friend for Setchfield launched back in 1994. All those umbrella organisations will now have to carry back the debate to their membership across the country. Mr Speaker, I'm proud of what this government has achieved. Working for this Prime Minister has been a privilege, and this Queen's speech shows that our determination to continue improving the lives of people in this country is done undiminished. In today's Queen's speech, my right honourable friend gives us a clear mandate, which I would summarise as follows: be bold, be radical, be inclusive, be cooperative.
Be Labour.
Rosemary and McKenna.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's an honour and a privilege, not only for me but for my constituency, to be asked to second the Queen's speech today. I also must admit it's a bit of a surprise. My understanding was that it was the experienced backbencher who moved the Queen's speech and the young up-and-coming MP. Now, I've been called many things in this chamber, some of them even complimentary, but young and up-and-coming are certainly not among them. I know too that 60 is the new 30, but I didn't think it applied here. There is, in fact, only a 2-year gap between my right honourable friend who proposed the loyal address. And I would prefer not to say which way the gap lies. But I've been assured, however, also that it's nothing to do with the recent legislation outlawing age discrimination that I've been asked to do this, simply that it was time for a change. So I have to say that, whatever the reason, I am incredibly honoured. But it's also an honour to follow my right honourable friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penarth, who has enjoyed a long and distinguished career in this House. We share a Celtic background. We both came to Parliament after being local government councillors. He has 5 children, I have 4, so between the two of us and my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, we're doing our bit to fund future pensions. We also share a belief in giving the people of Wales and Scotland a greater say over their own decisions within a strong United Kingdom. And it's been one of this government's most far-reaching and radical successful reforms. My family, I believe, is typical of the British family today. I had an Irish father, a Scottish mother. I have a brother-in-law of Italian origin. I have 2 English daughters-in-law, and I have 3 English grandchildren. They and the families that came to make up the mix that are of the United Kingdom today. And I believe that most people have no problem in saying that they are British and Welsh and Scottish and English and Irish. Hear, hear. And I believe those parties who want to artificially separate us have got it completely wrong. Hear, hear. Also, in my experience in Cumbernauld, I know that people want members of Parliament and politicians who work hard, who listen to them, and do not indulge in simply jester politics. I joined the Labour Party in 1967 when I moved from Glasgow and discovered a city, by the way, that I still love, and discovered there was no childcare provision. Within a few years, another young woman moved to the constituency and became active locally. We went on eventually to become chair and secretary of the constituency party, and in 1979 took the then seat from the SNP and elected Norman Hogg as the successor. I went on to be leader of the council in Provost, and she went on to a distinguished career in the voluntary sector. To our great delight, we were elected together on the same day in 1997. I'm referring, of course, to my honourable friend, the member for Stirling. But some of our colleagues and people in this House find it difficult to distinguish us apart. We find highly amusing and can only put it down to the fact that we are wee, somewhat round, Scottish, feisty women. Add in the honourable member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, and we can cause real chaos. But it's a special honour for me to speak today on the Prime Minister's last Queen's speech. Like many others here, I was elected on the day he led our party to a landslide victory and have benefited in two elections from his leadership. He's been the most successful leader of our party, and I believe he'll go on to be one of the most successful Prime Ministers we've ever had. And one of the privileges of maturity is not being regarded as one of the geese a job tendency. I was amazed to have found myself christened one of Blair's babes. Although I have to admit that I'm not sure that that would survive the challenge of the Trades Description Act, let alone the tough consumer protection legislation being introduced this year. I've campaigned all my political life for equality of opportunity for all, high-quality affordable childcare for working families and improved representation for women in politics. And I'm proud in all these areas our government has delivered. Any legislator must look like the people it represents. And that was one of the reasons I was delighted to be elected in 1997, when action by the Labour Party gave us more black and ethnic minority members and also over 100 women in Parliament. Indeed, it is a fact that the very first achievement of this Labour government was to install a coin-operated types machine. Mr. Speaker, as an occasional tights wearer, I'm sure you will agree is real. Today, of course, is not just an honour for me, but also for the constituency of Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. It is right in the heart of Scotland. It is made up of the villages that run along the Campsie Hills: Banton, Croy, Queenieburn, Twecker, Lennoxtown and Milton of Campsie, as well as part of the town of Kirkintilloch, which I share with the honourable member for Eastern Bartonshire, the town of Kilsyth and the new town of Cumbernauld. I see a bit of panic above me, so perhaps now would be a good time to assure the Hansard readers that my notes are to hand. It's a constituency of contrasts, visually and culturally. The traditional villages and towns with their mining backgrounds, fiercely proud, with the beautiful backdrop of the hills, and the new town on the opposite hill with its modern architecture, not always beautiful, but looking forward with great pride to its 50th anniversary of its creation next year. One of our new claims to fame is football. We have, of course, many different sporting successes: boxing, having had world and European champions, gymnastics and wrestling, to name but three. But at one end in Cumbernauld, we have home to Clyde, whose exciting young team just failed to win the Challenge Cup on penalties on Sunday. At the other end of the constituency, Lennoxtown is home to the new Celtic training ground, And in Tweccher, it's hoped to establish a football facility with that other great Glasgow team, Partick Thistle. I'm immensely proud to represent it all. It's also a constituency full of decent, hard-working families. It's the people and their sense of community that I see in every area that make it a great place to live and to work. I'm proud that this Labour government has played such a big role in improving life for my constituents and thousands like them. Throughout a stable economy, tax credits, full employment, superb education delivered through the Labour-led Scottish Executive, as well as North Lanarkshire and East Dunbartonshire councils. There is real hope for the future where 9 years ago there was deep resentment and a lack of opportunity and widespread poverty and unemployment. I'm particularly pleased that this Queen's speech contains measures to continue repaying our debt to the older generation. And perhaps as a pensioner here, I suppose I better declare an interest. But I believe the bill to overhaul and modernise the pension system, and especially to ensure a fairer deal for women, will get a welcome right across the land. Yeah. It also, of course, will re-establish the link with earnings, and I'm just old enough to remember the last time that was fashionable. It's another indication of how this government is working hard to extend security, prosperity and an opportunity for all. It was the hope that I might deliver solid improvements like this that I joined the Labour Party 39 years ago. I'm also pleased that I very much doubt our new young women MPs would encounter the kind of prejudice that those of us who came here in 1997 and before did. Mr. Speaker, I told the House this true story in my maiden speech. 3 new Scottish MPs went to view a flat and hailed a taxi to bring us back to the House of Commons. The driver asked us, "Are you all the wives of MPs then?" He got his answer. And I doubt he ever asked the question again. Even better, I doubt that anyone would ask that question today, and that in itself is a sign of real progress. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to commend the Queen's speech to the House.
Order. The question is that a humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Parliament, assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to Your Majesty for the gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. David Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I go on to commenting on the proposer and the seconder of the gracious speech, I want to start by paying tribute to the 4 servicemen and women who were killed in Basra on Sunday. Lee Hopkins, Sharon Elliott, Ben Noack and Jason Hilton. And I also pay tribute to Jamie Hancock, who was killed in Basra last week. Our thoughts are with their families. They died serving our country, and we honour their memory. Yeah. I also pay tribute to those members of the House who've left us since the last gracious speech. Patsy Carlton lost her courageous fight with cancer shortly after the general election last year. In spite of her illness, she came back to the House to continue her work, and none of us will forget her bravery in doing so. Rachel Squire will be sorely missed by both sides of the House and by her constituents. And I believe the whole House will miss Peter Law. A Labour man for decades, he will be fondly remembered on that side of the House, and for overturning one of the biggest Labour majorities in the whole of the country in the seat of Michael Foot and Nye Bevan, he'll be fondly remembered on this side of the House. Since the last gracious speech, the House has lost 2 of its greatest champions in Eric Forth and Robin Cook. It was a measure of Robin Cook's effectiveness that on this side of the House we can still remember his brilliant attack on the arms to Iraq issue. And on that side of the House, who can forget his withering criticism of the decision to go to war in Iraq? My first job in Parliament was as Eric Forth's deputy, I remember being summoned to his office to find that while he wasn't there, there was a life-size cutout of Elvis Presley. You never knew quite what to expect with Eric. Once again, both sides, I believe, have cause to remember him. He had complete scorn for everything done by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and only a little bit less for complete scorn by everything done by me. But we will all miss him. Let me congratulate the proposer and the seconder of the Loyal Address on their speeches. I thought the Right Honourable Member for Cardiff South and Penarth demonstrated some wonderful pronunciation, which I won't even attempt to follow. He told us about the Cooperative Party. He won't have seen, but at that moment the Prime Minister turned to look at him, but his gaze fell on the Chancellor, and I'm not sure the word cooperative was the first thing that came into his mind. Some have said unfairly about the Honourable Member for Cardiff South and Penarth that he lacks charisma. Even after his speech today, I say I profoundly disagree. He may not actually look like it, but the Right Honourable Member is the Labour Party's answer to Tom Cruise. He is always being sent on Mission Impossible. The Prime Minister sent him to Wales as the Downing Street choice for First Secretary. Nobody told him that the job would self-destruct in about 10 seconds. I think actually he was the first minister in history whose resignation was actually announced by the Leader of the Opposition during the Prime Minister's questions. But no sooner had the Right Honourable Member for Cardiff South and Penarth stepped free from the wreckage, he was sent on Mission Impossible 2. If we remember, as the countryside rose in revolt and anger, as hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, he was made Minister for Rural Affairs. But the Right Honourable Gentleman should take heart. He has always been called for when the government faces a crisis. And I think today his career opportunities must be almost limitless. I also congratulate the Honourable Lady who seconded the address. I thought it was... the Honourable Lady for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East, I hope I've got that right, made an excellent speech. It was a witty speech, and I think it was an important speech about the role of a Member of Parliament. It also passed two vital tests for both me and the Prime Minister. It was on message, and it spoke about his legacy. The only trouble was the message was that it was time for a change, which I wholly agree with, and the legacy was that we've now got a tights machine in the House of Commons. The Honourable Lady, I have done my research. The Honourable Lady is a staunch Blairite, and I gather that her favourite album is Saturday Night Fever. And when the Chancellor takes over, for staunch Blairites like her, Staying Alive will not just be a song on her iPod, it will be a daily challenge. I think very good to see them talking together. It's a good moment that brings them together. The proposer and the seconder have upheld the traditions of this House, and I congratulate them both. Of course, there are things in this gracious speech that we very much welcome. In fact, we proposed some of them. I'm delighted that the government is going to link the basic state pension to earnings. That's something we had in our last manifesto. The Treasury has finally been forced to make the provision of statistics independent, again a Conservative proposal. And then there is the climate change bill. That has been proposed over and over again by the Conservatives and opposed by the Prime Minister. Can I say how delighted I am to see it in the Queen's speech? I hope that it will be a proper bill and not a watered-down bill. Government has got to give a lead by setting a proper framework. That must mean an independent body with annual targets and an annual report from government on its progress. Let me turn to foreign policy. I welcome the specific mention in the gracious speech for Darfur. The Prime Minister will be acutely aware that this is a political crisis and a humanitarian disaster which is now crossing international borders. Much of our discussion on the gracious speech will inevitably be on Iraq and Afghanistan. I supported both actions, I support both democratically elected governments, and I support the troops and the work that they are doing today. What matters now is that with our allies we take the right actions to maximise the chances for stability and progress in both of those countries. First, Afghanistan. I've seen for myself, going to Afghanistan, the extraordinary work that our troops are doing as part of a NATO operation now involving 37 countries, backing a democratically elected government, entrenching stability, ensuring development, thwarting the Taliban. These are legitimate British interests. And I hope the Prime Minister, in his speech today, will tell the House how these efforts will be better equipped and, with our allies, strategically reinforced. Turning to Iraq, we all have a profound interest in preventing that country from sliding further into bloodshed, and so does the wider world. The options are stark. Simply cutting and running would cause mayhem, but the prospect of an open-ended commitment serves neither Iraq's interests nor our own, and anyway is simply not practical. There are no easy options. Militarily, we must do all we can to build up the Iraqi army, and diplomatically, we need to involve the regional powers. While there is merit in contact with Syria and Iran, after all, the whole point of diplomacy is to talk to countries well beyond your traditional friends, it is on the moderate Arab governments that I believe our efforts should concentrate. Their support for stability in Iraq is what we most need. And the key to securing that support is a fresh and unremitting push to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. I hope the Prime Minister will press President Bush to use America's influence to the full to achieve this, as well as enlisting the support of Europe. Taking these steps and maximising stability is the right background to bringing our troops home. But we should not set an artificial timetable. I hope the Prime Minister will be able to tell us today about how he hopes to make progress towards these goals. And I also hope that during the course of this session, the government will think again about how we can best ensure that the lessons are learnt from this conflict. After the Falklands War, a committee of Privy Councillors carried out this task in the Franks report. The same should happen again. Turning to Northern Ireland, we back the efforts to restore power sharing and devolution. We're clear that if it's going to succeed, then Sinn Féin must support the police, the courts and the rule of law. And they could start by telling their supporters to cooperate with the police investigation into the brutal murder of Robert McCartney. When people look back at the Prime Minister's time in office, they will give him enormous credit for his unstinting efforts to bring peace in Northern Ireland. But this will be the Prime Minister's last gracious speech. Indeed, it is the 13th time that the Prime Minister has taken part in a Queen's Speech debate as either Leader of the Opposition or as Prime Minister. Many on that side of the House, I know, are relieved that he is going. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, they are not half as relieved as we are. I have to say to the Prime Minister, I did check he was going before I applied for the job. A couple of days ago, he and I were talking about his first response to the gracious speech 12 years ago. Yes, I know, the Chancellor has been sitting there scowling and waiting for that long. I've read that speech from 1994, and so should the Prime Minister. Because back then, when he was Leader of the Opposition, he said, and I quote, "Millions of people are desperate for changes in the Child Support Agency. Yet today, under his government, that situation is more chaotic than ever." 12 years ago, as Leader of the Opposition, he said the pension system was a scandal. Yet it's his government that's taken from every pension fund in the country. 12 years ago, as Leader of the Opposition, he said the government was, and I quote, "so riven by faction it couldn't address the interests of the country." Mr. Speaker, what better description could there be of our government today? The tragedy of this Prime Minister is that he promised so much and yet has delivered so little. And the tragedy of this Queen's speech is that all his successor offers is more of the same. More laws on crime, yet violent crime up. More laws on health, yet hospitals closed. More laws on immigration, yet our borders still completely out of control. Every year the same promises, every year the same failures. The paradox of New Labour is that 12 years on, the Prime Minister is still desperately looking for this legacy. 3 massive majorities, a decade in power, 10 gracious speeches, 370 pieces of legislation, and the question they've got to answer is why has so little been achieved? It's because they put headlines above delivery, they believe in centralised power, not social responsibility, and all too often they just pass laws to make political points rather than to deliver real change. And Mr. Speaker, This Queen's speech is no different. It's so repetitive and hollow, people feel they've heard it all before. And it's so depressing they might think the Chancellor's already taken over. The Labour Party gave the game away when they said it's all about smoking out the opposition. That's what they said. It's not about keeping hospitals open or keeping the streets safe. It's about trying to keep a tired and discredited Labour Party in power. And the truth is they failed to deliver. Now, nowhere is this failure to deliver more clear than in the two vital areas of health and crime. 9 years ago, the Prime Minister claimed there were 24 hours to save the NHS. Yet today, 20,000 jobs are being cut in the health service. They never had a clue how to reform the health service. They scrapped GP fund holding, now they're bringing it back. They abolished the internal market, now they're bringing it back. The Health Secretary shakes her head, but she's the one who said they've had their best ever year in the health service. We've had 16 acts, 9 reorganisations, health authorities abolished, now they're brought back again, community health councils, they were scrapped, and patients' forums were brought in. Barely are they up and running, now they're all being abolished. Morale sapped, money wasted, deficits at record levels. The Chief Medical Officer tells us that in public health there are, and I quote, declining numbers, inadequate recruitment and budgets raided to solve financial deficits. The Royal College of Nurses says staff are being placed under intolerable and unsustainable pressure. And the chairman of the British Medical Association says he is dismayed by what he calls the incoherence of current government policies. So much for 24 hours to save the NHS. All over the country, we're seeing departments closed, hospitals threatened, staff being sacked. To paraphrase a former leader of the Labour Party, we've ended up with the grotesque chaos of a Labour government, that's a Labour government, scuttling around the country, handing out redundancy notices to their own NHS staff. No wonder they aren't trusted anymore on the NHS. Failure on health is matched by failure on crime. After 9 years, every part of our criminal justice system is in a shambles. The chairman of the Youth Justice Board, let's listen to him. He says the juvenile system is in danger of meltdown. The Chief Inspector of Prisons says the system is approaching breaking point. The Lord Chancellor, the man who's actually in charge of the whole legal system, says that there is, and I quote, general chaos. Even the Home Secretary says the probation service is poor and mediocre, the immigration service is dysfunctional, and the Home Office isn't fit for purpose. Just today we found Islamic extremists apparently working in the immigration department. Hizb ut-Tahrir are banned in Egypt. In Britain, they seem to be running our immigration policy. And now we've got the extraordinary sight of the Chancellor and the Home Secretary squabbling about how best to make this the election-winning issue for Labour at the next election. If they think they can win an election on this record, let's get on with it. We've had 50 Home Office bills, some of them completely contradictory. Let's just take one act, just one. The 2000 Criminal Justice Act. 6 years later, 6 years on, 110 provisions not in force. 17 were repealed even before the Act was brought in. And another 39 have been repealed subsequently. The government likes to talk tough, but they've just been acting dumb. That is the story of this government. Yes, I certainly give way.
I'm grateful to Right Honourable Member for giving way. Given his party's voting record in Parliament in the last 9 years on criminal measures and being soft on crime, can I suggest that on his own iPod he takes off Elton John's Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting and instead puts on Bob Dylan's, he's a fan of Bob Dylan, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue.
I think, as the Prime Minister has said, the honourable gentleman have been practising that one in the mirror for a little bit too long. But look at the mess today. We've got paedophiles left in bail hostels, dangerous criminals in open prisons, and 1,000 criminals released from prison who should have been deported. Now the Chancellor now tells us that he's going to guarantee security in a dangerous world. He told us he would freeze the assets of terrorists, but he can't even stop Abu Hamza playing the property market with public money when he's sitting in Belmarsh prison. They talk about security, but it's their bungling incompetence that's made people feel so insecure. At the beginning of his time, the Prime Minister offered the country hope that he would tackle the causes of crime. But as we look at the measures placed before the House today, all we can see is a complete betrayal and a debasement of that vital agenda. Nothing about family breakdown, nothing about addiction and dependency. The Prime Minister's simply given up on the causes of crime. All we get is a sort of eye-catching set of initiatives that last us about as long as a news bulletin. We've had night courts, weekend prisons, we've even had ASBOs for unborn children, all launched in a great blaze of publicity, all scrapped. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor started out wanting to save the NHS and tackle the causes of crime, but they ended up closing hospitals and closing their minds on crime. They started with hope, now there's just fear. They started with ambition, now there's just a poverty of vision. Now, the Prime Minister is going to introduce this Queen's Speech, but he won't be around to see it through. There's going to be a new...
Let the right honourable gentleman speak. And while I'm on my feet, that Mr Rowan and Mr Causey, that two of the quietest living members I know, but they're very noisy today, and perhaps you could be quiet. Right honourable gentleman.
Speaker, the Prime Minister won't be around to see this Queen's Speech through. There's going to be a new power in the land. And, Mr Speaker, we've been lucky to have a unique insight. I think the Home Secretary will enjoy this. We've had a unique insight from one of Britain's leading character actors, Keith Alun, about what to expect. He is playing the sheriff... Well, wait and you'll find out. He's playing the Sheriff of Nottingham in the BBC's new drama, Robin Hood. And this is what he said about his character. This is what he said about the Sheriff of Nottingham. A calculating political mind that will stop at nothing. The Sheriff is a sociopath. He sees himself as the future dictator of England. I've based him on Gordon Brown. But we shouldn't... I'm glad... The Chancellor shouldn't be upset. I know he got booed at the Music Awards last night. There's only one worse thing than being booed at Music Awards, and that's because they were chanting, "Bring back Tony." But we shouldn't expect anything different from the Chancellor, because if the problem with this government is short-term gimmicks, politically motivated laws and failed centralisation, the Chancellor isn't the solution, he's the biggest part of the problem. What about, yes, British Day? What happened to British Day when we were meant to put flagpoles on our lawns? Disappeared without a trace. What happened to the Chancellor's e-university that was meant to link communities together? No one uses it. What happened to the Chancellor's national tour that was launched in such a fanfare? It never happened. Last December, the Chancellor promised us a comprehensive report on the financing of terror. I would have thought honourable members would be interested opposite in a report on the financing of terror. Almost a year later, nothing has happened. All typical hallmarks of the Chancellor. And when it comes to centralisation, it's the Chancellor and the Treasury that have complicated the tax system, confused the benefit system and virtually bankrupted the pension system. Today, they're promising action on immigration. We've now had 10 gracious speeches from this government. It's the 4th time they've promised to tackle immigration. It's the 5th time they've promised to tackle antisocial behaviour. And it's the 7th time they've promised to reform the House of Lords. All they are offering is more of the same, and it never happens. People have heard it all before, and they don't believe it anymore. All we'll get from the Chancellor is a darker shade of fail. Oh, I give way to the honourable member for Hastings.
Great for the honourable member. Would the honourable member, the right honourable member, tell us, because he's getting towards the end of his speech, if he's got a single idea before we waste the rest of the afternoon?
He should be patient. So, as I said, the only good ideas in the Queen's Speech are our ideas. The climate change bill, the point system on immigration, using proper methods for teaching children how to read. Those were all Conservative proposals. They're all being implemented by Labour. What this Queen's Speech should have been about is the long term, the national interest, trusting people, not centralising power. We need an NHS independence bill that gives responsibility to professionals in the health service. We need a communities bill which gives local people control over money spent in their areas. We need to build a stronger economy by trusting business with cuts in regulation and simple taxes. Action on climate change, backing Britain's families, real improvements in the health service, real standards in our schools. It's the Conservative Party that's leading the debate in all these areas. Today, there is a new dividing line in British politics between hope and fear. This was the Prime Minister's last chance to offer hope for a better society. Instead, he chose fear to try and cover up his failures. This This is the politics of fear from a government of failure. And in place of this exhausted Labour government, we need a fresh Conservative Party and Conservative government that offers change, optimism and hope.
The Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, before I come to my speech, let me just say to the right honourable gentleman, he talked about 12 years ago. I remember 12 years ago, our economy had just been through 2 recessions caused by this Conservative government. Today we have the strongest economy, the lowest unemployment, the lowest inflation, the lowest interest rates. I remember 12 years ago, we had thousands of people waiting 18 months just on an inpatient list. Now we're on the way to an 18-week maximum target in an outpatient. I remember 12 years ago, we had kids being taught in crumbling school buildings. I remember 12 years ago a Conservative government that had doubled crime. Right. And if he's talking about hope, let me just tell him something about hope. Hope's not built on talking about sunshine any more than antisocial behaviour. Any more than antisocial behaviour is combated by love, in inverted commas. Hope is what a strong economy gives you. Hope is what investment in the NHS and schools gives you. Hope are proper measures to tackle the long-term challenges. Hope, true hope, is about tough decision-making, and the right honourable gentleman's never taken a tough decision in his life. And now to my speech. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I may be going out, but on that performance, he's not coming in. Before I begin, however, I'm sure of that little interlude. Yeah, well, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join with me, as did the right honourable gentleman very properly at the beginning of his speech, in sending our condolences to the families and friends of the 5 service personnel killed in Iraq in recent weeks. Kingsman Jamie Hancock, Warrant Officer Lee Hopkins, Staff Sergeant Sharon Elliott, Corporal Ben Novak, and Marine Jason Hilton. Our thoughts are also with the families of the 3 servicemen who were injured in Sunday's attack. They were doing an essential job for the security of Iraq and the wider world, and we owe them a profound debt of gratitude. Yeah. Remembrance Sunday took on a special significance for this country at this time, both in respect of our losses in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And our thoughts and prayers, therefore, are not just with the families of those that have fallen, but with all those who serve in our armed forces in difficult fields of conflict today. Mr. Speaker, I obviously will join fulsomely in the tribute to my right honourable friends, but before I do so, let me also pay tribute to those members of Parliament of all parties who have passed away since the last Queen's speech. I fully join and endorse the tributes of the right honourable gentleman, Patsy Calton and Robin Cook, Rachel Squire, Peter Law and Eric Forth, may not have had much in common in their political views or indeed their length of service in this House, but what they did all of them have in common was the high regard in which they were held, both by their constituents and by their colleagues on all sides of the House. The House will, I hope, understand if I single out Robin Cook, however. Whatever our disagreements over Iraq, he was an extraordinary talent, a brilliant debater, a fearless and determined advocate of progressive causes, and perhaps the greatest parliamentarian of his generation. He is still sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, there are, in thanking my right honourable friend and my honourable friend for proposing and seconding the Queen's speech, I think the right honourable gentleman, Leader of the Opposition, is right. There are probably few people I owe more to than my right honourable friend, having given him one hospital pass after another in the course of his very distinguished career. Indeed, I think given some of the tasks that he was asked to perform on my behalf, if when the call came through from number 10 he'd refused to take it, it would have been understandable. He, first of all, did a difficult job in very difficult circumstances, obviously, in respect of Wales. But then I would like to pay tribute also to the tremendous skill and patience and at times personal courage with which he tried to find a way through the various difficulties of the hunting ban, not least trying to persuade the Countryside Alliance that it was going to be not so bad. He, in addition to that, however, did something that I think is really worth remembering, and he mentioned it in his speech. it was thanks to his vision, and I remember very well the occasion he took me down to the Cardiff Bay and showed me the possibilities of it. And it was due to his work that the Cardiff Bay was developed in that way. It's now a development that has brought in literally hundreds of millions of pounds of investment and thousands of jobs, and he deserves tremendous credit for it. My honourable friend for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East is, in comparison to my right honourable friend, a relative newcomer to this House. But there is nothing recent about her record of fighting for Scotland and for devolution, which she has done throughout her political life. And it was fitting that she was able to make her maiden speech in this House during the debate on the referendum bill for a Scottish Parliament and a National Assembly for Wales. But as she rightly said, she's been equally determined on the representation of women in politics. And I'm sorry she had to go through the indignity of being designated one of the Blair babes, but if it was any consolation to her, I had a look at the photograph of us all in 1997 the other day, and she's aged considerably better than me. Mr. Speaker, sir, the theme of this Queen's speech is taking the long-term decisions necessary to give us security and opportunity in a rapidly changing world. Such a pace of change is transforming the nature of the challenges we face. Challenges for our economy through globalisation, for our environment through climate change, in respect of our security through terrorism and mass migration, and in our demography through an ageing population, which in a few years will have more people over the age of 64 than under the age of 16 for the first time in the country's history. It is also, of course, against the background of our continuing involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq. Let me just say this on both of those issues. It is obviously a very difficult situation. There are immense challenges in both countries. But I believe it is important that we hold firm, that we show strength, that we stand up to those forces, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, that are trying to prevent those countries getting the democracy their people so obviously want. I think in respect of Iraq, it is important that we make sure there is a broad-based and non-sectarian government. And as I explained the other night at the Lord Mayor's banquet, it's important also that we fill the gaps that there are still in the equipping, training and capability of the Iraqi armed forces. But I would just say this, at the present time in Basra, for all the difficulties, there is an operation going on that the British armed forces are supporting. The bomb the other day was designed to stop that operation working. But that operation is being led by the Iraqi forces. They are doing it well, and it is of vital importance that our forces remain in support so that the authorities, proper authorities in Basra, are in full control of the city. And whether it is in Iraq or Afghanistan, I think exactly the same issues are present in both countries. On the one side, you have countries, after years of failed and brutally oppressive governments, trying to put a democracy on their feet, and on the other side, you have those who, by terrorism, are trying to destroy that possibility. And I think our task, as I've said on many occasions, is to stand firm with the Democrats against the terrorists. I will certainly allow you.
Would he accept that the reason that movement of opinion is moving away from our continued position in Iraq is that there doesn't seem to be any progress on security whatsoever, and that the feeling exists that next year, the year after, or in many years to come, it may well be it will remain the same as it is now. Therefore, is there not a case for an urgent reassessment of our position in that country and recognising the number of people daily who are being slaughtered, and where the occupation in no way is preventing that, as well, of course, as the killing of our own armed force personnel?
Well, I think the best answer to that was given the other day by the Iraqi Prime Minister, who said that the Iraqi capability was building the entire time. Indeed, people will remember a couple of weeks ago, for example, in Al-Amara, which was where the police and the armed forces of Iraq were at first overrun in that city by Shia extremists. Within the next 48 hours, the Iraqi forces, admittedly with the British in reserve support, retook the city. And actually, throughout the south of the country, we can see progressively how we are able to withdraw from our forward positions as the Iraqi capability takes on greater significance and greater capacity. And I have to say to him, I think the single most damaging thing at the moment, and this is why it's so important and so helpful if we send out as united as possible a position from this House, the most important thing is not to send any signal to the enemy that we're fighting that our will or our determination is going to be undermined by the difficulties that we face. And on that point,
Yeah, on that point, in response to the Prime Minister's video contribution to the Baker Commission reassessing American strategy in Iraq, the White House said that the Prime Minister's strategy wasn't new and was similar to President Bush's policy. Is it the case that it's not new? Is it similar to President Bush's policy? And is there any exit strategy at all?
The strategy is to go when our job is done. And the reason that job is important is that if we end up in a situation where we allow those people through terrorism, and they're the same elements fueling extremism right round the region, if we allow them victory in Iraq or Afghanistan, it is not just a tragedy for those two countries, but I have to say to the honourable gentleman, it is a tragedy for the security of the world, including in this country. September the 11th came out of Afghanistan, exactly the same elements that are in Iraq today, fueling the terrorism. Yeah, but I have to educate the honourable gentleman. Al-Qaeda is in Iraq, carrying out suicide missions. And I believe that our task is to stand up to those terrorists, not as he would give in to them. I also, incidentally, fully agree with what the Right Honourable Gentleman said about the wider Middle East, and of course it's important that we take that seriously. Let me turn to climate change, which is an issue... yes, that's a good way.
Before he moves on from terrorism, if the head of the security forces is right that there are so many people in this country that represent a potential threat, why isn't evidence collected and why aren't they brought to trial?
Of course, we do collect evidence and we do bring them to trial, but the very reason we introduced measures, stronger measures on terrorism, and that was, if I remember, at a time when I was accused of scaremongering, when I said this was a severe problem in the country, the reason why we have to consider measures again now is precisely because of that threat. And I hope we can put together measures that will be based on the advice of the police and the security services. And if we do bring forward those measures, the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues will this time support those measures. Now, let me begin. Well, look, I'll take one more and then I'll have to make a bit of progress.
Prime Minister, for his generosity. But whilst I think most of us would accept that, with regards to the policy on Iraq, that it would be wrong to cut and run, and that would only compound the original error, does he not accept that it is not a sign of weakness or division for this House to properly debate the future of Iraq at a time when we're getting different messages from different policymakers, whether it's splitting the country up into three or involving Iran and Iraq, splitting the country up into three, as I say, by the Foreign Secretary, or enforcing a national compact by the President. Will the Prime Minister now grant this House a full debate about the future on Iraq?
I have to say to him, first of all, let me just make it clear, because we don't want any danger at all of people misunderstanding the British government policy. The British government policy is not to partition Iraq into three. That would be quite disastrous, and the Foreign Secretary most certainly did not say that. Secondly, let me just tell him this. He may regard removing Saddam Hussein as an error. I don't. Now, in relation to climate change, the Stern Review removed any lingering doubts about the threat we face. It also added a new dimension. The costs of not intervening now vastly outweigh the costs of action. But we know the only solution, ultimately, is through international action. That is why the G8+5 initiative began at Gleneagles is so pivotal to get a strong and effective post-2012, post-Kyoto agreement soon. It is why the European trading system and cooperation in the European Union is so essential also. The groundbreaking agreement that the United Kingdom has recently pioneered with the state of California shows that round the world, particularly indeed in the United States, the mood is shifting towards more radical action. And it's right that we reflect that shift here. We are one of the few countries in the world to meet, in fact, to double our Kyoto targets, and our leadership position on the issue actually is clear. We must retain it, but I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we have to retain it whilst acting sensibly. The United Kingdom, after all, is responsible for only 2% of total global emissions. Right. If we shut down the whole of the UK's emissions, shut all our electricity off tomorrow, the growth, just the growth in China's emissions, would eliminate the effect in under 2 years. So without an international agreement, we are never going to make proper progress on this issue. The bill we will propose will put in legislation the long-term UK target for emissions. It will establish, as we've said, an independent body, the Carbon Committee, to work with government. It will take further powers to implement the energy review, and it will include interim targets, but not annual targets. And let me explain to him why we are against the prospect of annual targets. But that is not the only reason why it is important. It's important because climate change is not the only issue shaping energy policy. We also need energy security. And for Britain in the future, this is essential. In 15 years, we are going to move from a position of being 80–90% self-supportive, not reliant on imports, but actually able for our own self-sufficiency in oil and gas, and we're going to move to a situation where we are importing 80–90%. Now, in those circumstances, where we're also going to lose around 15% of our electricity capability through the phasing out of nuclear power stations, then I say to the House, in common with countries round the world, we need to put nuclear power back on the agenda and at least replace the nuclear energy we will lose. Without it, we will not be able to meet either our objectives on climate change or our objectives on energy security. Now, these are difficult decisions, and they're controversial, but they are absolutely necessary. I have looked carefully at what the Right Honourable Gentleman and his team have been suggesting on this issue. First of all, they suggested this. They suggested that we had to have 3% annual targets, right? The Shadow Energy Minister said, if the climate change bill is to have teeth and be workable, it must be measurable. Unless we say we want to achieve a 3% reduction in emissions year on year, the outcome will not be measurable. Right. Then the Right Honourable Gentleman walked away from it, and now his Shadow Environment spokesman is apparently saying what he actually wants is a rolling programme of targets that would be adjusted mathematically according to the progress or otherwise we make. Now, let me just explain to the Right Honourable Gentleman. If we end up with an annual target, let us say of 3%, then we could have a colder than usual winter, the emissions would then go up, and we would then be in a position where we simply couldn't meet the target. And he is suggesting that this target has statutory authority, so that government is obliged to do it. And supposing, for example, supposing the fuel price actually fell, supposing as a result of the fuel price falling, then we get an increase in emissions. Is he really going to suggest that we put back on the fuel duty escalator, that we raise the fuel duty? I doubt it. And as for nuclear power, let me go through the various positions that the Right Honourable Gentleman has had on nuclear power. His industry spokesman said this: from about the age of 12, I've had an instinctive hostility to nuclear power. His Shadow Chancellor, I'm happy to see nuclear power. The Right Honourable Gentleman, I'm not dogmatically in favour of nuclear power, nor dogmatically against. What's my position? I'm in favour of it. Is he in favour of it? Yeah, no, I'm in favour of it. Hang on. This is government. He asked me what my position is. I'm in favour of it. Right, what's his position? Well, it actually gets better. Let me read his position. He gave it... Just in a moment. He gave his position just the other day in an interview in Green Futures. Just read this. I want to give every opportunity for green sources of energy to come through. If they do, well and good. If they don't, and we have to keep the lights on, then nuclear might come into the picture. So, hang on a minute. So what's he going to do? The Cabinet Secretary, he's the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Secretary comes in and says, I'm afraid the renewables haven't generated as much as we want. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to keep the lights on. What's he going to say? Rustle me up a nuclear power station. Wait, I've got one more. And in case we haven't had enough changes of policy, another one of his shadow ministers said this morning, this is the latest, hot off the press of their so-called annual binding targets that are going to be rigorous. Now, it might well be that you don't necessarily meet an annual target. Hang on. we have 4 different policy positions, and from the right honourable gentleman sitting on the fence. Right? Yes.
I'm very grateful for the Prime Minister for giving way. When John Wakeham and I privatised the electricity industry, the original intention had been to privatise the nuclear industry, the nuclear power. But we could not find anyone in the City of London who was prepared to meet the contingent liabilities of decommissioning nuclear power stations. If the Prime Minister is in favour of nuclear power, is he saying to the House that the Treasury will always meet the costs of decommissioning nuclear power stations, because the City has made it very clear the private sector will never do that?
The decommissioning costs have to be met in any event. And of course it is good. Yes, because we have nuclear power stations now. So we will have nuclear waste that we have to decommission. The point is this. When, over the next few years, our nuclear power stations are closed, are we at least going to replace them? I say yes. What does he say? We don't know. Anyway, likewise, Mr. Speaker, the other important long-term challenge is on pensions reform. The Turner report provides us with a good framework on pensions reform, and we should implement it. In addition, by removing more people off benefit and into work, then we are able to provide better welfare measures for our citizens. In addition to those measures of reform, and I will come to law and order in a moment, there are the measures, for example, on bus travel. There will be free off-peak local bus travel for all pensioners and disabled people. There will be proposals to speed up and simplify the planning process, measures to facilitate greater flexibility in decision-making in local government, and measures on redress for consumers and, of course, on Northern Ireland. And on Northern Ireland, I hope very much that we will be able to make the progress necessary to see the institutions up and running again. Now, I'd like to focus for a moment on those measures that relate to crime, migration and security. Again, the reason for further action is clear. The nature of crime is changing: antisocial behaviour, organised crime and terrorism. The traditional view of liberty and security, in our judgment, has to change. The right honourable gentleman said in his speech, and indeed this is commonly said by his front bench, that laws are not the answer. Laws are not the whole of the answer, but I'm afraid they are part of the answer. The fact is, without antisocial behaviour legislation, we would never have been able to tackle the blight of antisocial behaviour in our constituencies. If we go... I'm sorry, he can go just a few miles from here to King's Cross and see the changes that have been made, or visit, for example, the inner-city suburb in East Manchester that I saw the other day. Go anywhere in the country where these powers are being used, where they are closing down the houses of crack dealers, where they're putting antisocial behaviour orders on people, where they're making sure that the new powers the police have are used properly. If the Conservatives keep setting their face against antisocial behaviour legislation, they are completely out of touch with the needs of people in this country. In addition to that, of course, there is the shifting of the emphasis from the offence to the offender. And again, through this additional legislation, we are able to take further the measures in relation to that, including measures specifically on violent crime. There will be new ways of managing the offenders through the National Offender Management Service, and changes in sentencing, and also changes in the powers that we need to deal with organised crime. In relation to terrorism, the right honourable gentleman again suggested that this was somehow we should be talking the language of hope and not fear. Look, there is no point in being unrealistic about this. We have a genuine, serious terrorist threat. This country faces it, other countries face it. We are not talking the politics of fear here. We are talking the politics of a realistic assessment of threat and measures necessary to meet it. And I hope this time, when we draw up the measures that are necessary to tackle this, we get the support of the whole House. It would be the single, it would really be, and I'm happy to work with him and his honourable members and colleagues on this, but it really would be the best message we could send out to those who are engaged in inciting terrorism in our country. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. The Prime Minister will be aware that it's been reported that a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir is working as a senior official in the Immigration and Nationality Department. Can the Prime Minister explain how this has come to pass? And can the Prime Minister also explain why he has not honoured his promise to prescribe that organisation?
The rules on prescription, of course, are one of the changes that we made. Now, there's a process that has to be gone through, and that process is being gone through. In relation to the particular newspaper story, my right honourable friend tells me he's looking at the circumstances and the facts. But, well, I think it would not... I don't think it would be right to do anything else, would it, given that there's a particular individual concern. The fact of the... I've been giving away quite a lot, really. But I'm so generous.
I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. As regards terrorism, written answers from the Home Office have revealed that neither the Home Office nor the Metropolitan Police Service have any statistics as to what day during detention terror suspects have been either released or charged. If it is the intention of the government to increase the period of detention, will the Prime Minister give an assurance to this House that he will produce proper evidence, and not just sound bites and rhetoric, but proper evidence to justify an increase in detention periods?
You see, I have to say, I think it's a very poor point for the reason that I will give. When he says that the only justification we put forward for the 90 days was sound bites and rhetoric, the justification was a written submission. Well, the evidence we put forward was a written submission from the head of the anti-terrorist police force. Now, that is with the greatest respect to the honourable gentleman. It's not a politician's soundbite. That is evidence from the person who's actually charged with dealing with terrorism in this country. And, I mean, I had hoped in the intervening period of time, the Conservative Party had slightly come to their senses about this, but his intervention does not give me a great deal of hope. Now, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, and that, with greatest respect, is an answer to the point. In respect of the time that it takes for each... In respect of the time it takes for each terrorist suspect to be questioned, and at what point they are then either charged or released, my understanding certainly is that the figures have been given for that. Well, in that case, in relation certainly... Well, in that case, let me tell the honourable gentleman I'm very happy, in respect of those people, for example, that have just been charged over the recent events, we can send that information to him. So. Mr. Speaker, now look, I've been very generous, but honestly, I've got to. I'm sure there are other honourable members that want to speak. Come on. Come on then. All right.
I'm very grateful for him for giving way. If the government is going to act toughly on terror, and rightly, can he explain to the House why only £476,000 of suspect funds have been seized in 6 years?
I don't, first of all, know that that particular figure is correct, but in any event, let me say to him, we use the full range of the law we have to seize assets under the Proceeds of Crime Act, and it is only as a result of the measures that we have taken that we're able to do that at all. And I hope, since he says that we want tough measures on terrorism, that if we bring forward such tough measures on terrorism, this time he and his honourable friends will actually support those measures. Now, the fact is, Mr. Speaker, over the past few years, we have introduced a stronger economy, investment and reform in our health service, in our schools, record numbers of police. Actually, crime on the British Crime Survey is down, but not just that. We've introduced the Sure Start, the New Deal, expanded childcare, better maternity pay, better maternity leave, a whole host of things for the benefit of this country. Today, what we do is we introduce measures both on climate change and on pensions, on welfare, on tackling the long-term problems of this country in relation to crime and immigration and security that give us the best chance of defeating those challenges and meeting them in the right way. Well, I'll tell you what they will believe. They will believe this, that when I first came in this House, I had 40% unemployment in parts of my constituency, and now I'm below the national average. And the government that he used to support, was a government that left people literally waiting and dying for their heart operations. And the government he used to support had people working for £1.50 an hour before we introduced the minimum wage. Thank you for giving me the opportunity of reminding people. What the right honourable gentleman did today, however, is an absolute indication of the difficulties that he has. When it is a question of attack, then he can make the attack. But when it is a question of giving the alternative, he has no alternative to give. The truth of the matter is that he spends most of his time avoiding difficult decisions, but when forced to decide, decides wrongly. Let's just look, for example, of what he says about tax and spending. That goes right to the heart of whether we run an effective economy or not. It used to be clear. He said he had a new fiscal rule that would share the proceeds of growth. So we would say that there would be less spending than the government. But then I've been through the spending commitments the right honourable gentleman has made. He's called for more spending on prisons, more on housing, more on schools, more on occupational therapy, more on drug rehabilitation, more on police, more on intelligence services, more on charities, more nurses, health visitors, more for childcare for parents, more for childcare for grandparents, and on post officers. Billions more. And then comes the Tory Tax Commission that then proposes £21 billion worth of tax cuts. So how does he make it add up? He's got his fiscal rule. Well, let me give him an example. This is a quote from the Tory NHS campaign pack, right? Question. Here's this for clarity of policy. Are you guaranteeing increased spending on the NHS? First line. We are not calling for further immediate increases on NHS spending. Fair enough. Second line. We have made an unambiguous commitment to increase spending. Third line, we've made it clear we will share the proceeds of growth between increased spending and reducing tax. The fact is, if he tries cutting taxes and spending more with the same money, it's not sharing the proceeds of growth, it's sharing out the disaster of recession this country will face. So, Mr. Speaker, whether it is on... No, I'm afraid I'm giving up on that. It doesn't matter what area of policy it is. Everything from his bizarre idea that somehow youngsters should go on a booze course in order to find out whether they're fit to booze or not, from his opposition to ID cards, is it still the policy of the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw from the European People's Party or not? We simply don't know. And this from a Leader of the Opposition that said the hallmark of his leadership was going to be consistency and sticking to his guns. The fact of the matter is, as he demonstrated again today, he, in the end, because he has no interest in the substance of policy, he cannot actually either understand the long-term challenge of this country or meet them. The next election, it will be a flyweight versus a heavyweight. And however much he may dance around the ring before times, at some point, he'll come within the reach of a big clunking fist, and he'll be... And you know what? He'll be out on his feet, carried out of the ring, the fifth Tory leader to be carried out, and a fourth-term Labour government still standing.